Good afternoon and welcome to today's Ad Week webinar, where we'll be talking about how to grow your brand when spending slows. Today's webinar is sponsored by GroundTruth. I'm Danielle Moore, Senior Manager here with Ad Week's Content Studio, and I'll be your host. Before we get started, I do want to take a few minutes just to make sure everyone knows what to expect from today's event and is familiar with the features of our platform here. Today's webinar should go somewhere in the 25 to 30-minute range, after which we'll definitely have time for audience Q&A. So if at any point you have a question for one of our speakers today, just use that Q&A tool right beneath the video window on your screen. We'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. Also, definitely not too late to invite your colleagues to join us at today's event. About 15 minutes ago, you should have received a final reminder email from us, and in there you can find a link to the webinar registration page you can share with your colleagues. Still plenty of time for them to join us live, but do know if they can't, today's webinar has been recorded, and they will be able to catch the on-demand version. So we'll send that out later today when it's live, around 3:30 Eastern. Be sure to keep an eye out for that recording. As always, if you enjoyed today's webinar, definitely check out our full schedule of upcoming events, the Ad Week Webinars calendar, which you can find linked in the event resources area below. Also, in that event resources area, you can find a link to Ad Week's resource library, where we have new guides, white papers, and other content added regularly. So be sure to check all of that out if you're looking for other ways to stay up to date. All right, we have a lot of speakers to introduce today, so I'm excited to introduce them. First one here, we have Kaylee Campos, the Integrated Media Director at DNA Creates. Kaylee's expertise in full funnel media strategies and passion for brand marketing make her a key leader at DNA. With years of experience in crafting integrated campaigns across experiential, OOH, and digital landscapes, she specializes in merging creativity, planning, and measurement to drive impactful business results. We're also pleased to welcome Kelly Gamble, Senior Director of Brand at Tractor Beverage Co. Kelly is a seasoned marketing leader with a rich background in crafting innovative strategies for the beverage industry. And in her current role, she orchestrates the relationship between Tractor and the community. Finally, we're pleased to welcome Brian Shepard, Managed Sales Director at GroundTruth. Brian oversees a team responsible for working with many retail, health, travel, financial, and QSR clients to drive real business results. He's held a number of sales roles at companies like AOL, TripAdvisor, Time Warner, and IBM. All right, we've got a lot of great content to dive into today. So without further ado, let me bring our speakers up on screen here to get us started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Brian, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Danielle. And Kaylee and Kelly, great to see you. I'm excited to be here and speak with you.
I think your audio may have cut out. Can you test for me?
Yep. How's that?
I can hear you now. Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think it's very timely that our topic is called Grow Your Brand When Spending Slows. Given that, we're coming off a year where we've seen a lot of up and down in economic news, foreign conflict escalations, an election year that's almost a reality show with plot twists every week. And then this week with two stories dominating the headlines, being the unfortunate situation in the South with Hurricane Helene and an impending strike along our seaports here in the Northeast. So I imagine as a marketer, Kaylee and Kelly, that the last year or so, and maybe even going back to COVID, it's never been harder or more challenging to do your job. Can you walk us through what it's like to navigate these unpredictable waters we've found ourselves in the last few years?
Yeah, I think it's really important to not only be a nimble planner, but also select nimble partners, people who have things like brand safety in place when it comes to when unfortunate things like this happens in our society. I've definitely experienced things that have happened in a very specific community during times where campaigns have been live. And, you want to put yourself in the mind of the consumer and how would they feel in that moment, being targeted for certain products or brands when they're experiencing something so tragic. So I think that your partner selection and your ability to be empathetic is really important when dealing with situations like that.
I agree with the empathy big time. There are always going to be things that happen in the world. And while I am a marketer, we're marketers here. We also are consumers. And so we understand that things are happening. There are many things within campaigns, you have to modify them. But I think the important thing is really just coming from a place of compassion and understanding what people are going through. And when you're creating things from a brand perspective, so Tractor Beverage is an impact brand. We are here to create better opportunities and things for people. So it's within our brand ethos to really look at what we can do to help people through different situations that they're going through. So I think as true, genuine brands, it's our responsibility as marketers to always understand the consumers and what their needs are and what they're feeling and what they're going through.
Oh, that's great. And is this our new normal? I mean, are we just going to have, has your job changed from, not really having a long-term strategy and feeling like, it's like, all right, just got to see what happens every 3 to 6 months and pivot? How do you balance between, long-term strategy and growth and dealing with the unpredictable things that kind of come up? How does that affect your job day to day?
I mean, it definitely affects my job. Something that I've had to actively consider is contingency plans. It's almost like a separate plan from your main plan of, if performance dips, what's going to happen? If something happens in the world, what's going to happen? What are these triggers that are going to put us in a position to proactively react? I think there's some times where we get in this position of just react. And we're not necessarily thinking through the long-term strategy, to your point. So I think there's this delicate balance of proactive reactivity when it comes to considering some of those things.
I think that's one of the exciting things about being in this role. Things are changing just in general with the way that younger generations think. We have so much more technology and so many things at our fingertips that we haven't had in the past. So I think those short-term ways of thinking about how we approach strategy and campaigns is really important. It's not gonna stop. It's gonna keep going. And I think it's really important for us to really understand what can we do in those moments where we do have to pivot. We do have to switch our way of thinking so that we can meet the needs of those consumers. I find it exciting. I mean, it can make us all a little bit nervous at times, but I think it's what keeps this side of things really fun and really exhilarating, and it helps us to connect with people.
I completely agree. I do think it's exciting, right? Like no week is the same, no month is the same, no week is the same. So I do think it kind of provides an invigoration, right, in our jobs. And to your point, it doesn't always mean it goes right, but it pushes us to think and get creative and learn new things. So I love those answers. Thank you. Given what you just shared on that, how do you approach, what the customer is going through? And so now we're going to kind of dig in more. So, again, economic issues, strikes, political upheaval. How do you sort of approach what that customer is going through? What behaviors do you try to observe in order to reach them, and then get them to do what you want them to do, whether that's, visit your website or walk into a physical location? What sort of things are you looking for to observe in those types of behaviors?
I definitely can say that, kind of back to your earlier point, it's not enough to just know about marketing and advertising. You kind of have to be on the pulse of culture and economy and real estate and all of these different elements of the world that makes us function. And I think, for me as a marketer on the agency side, really leveraging audience tools to understand at a more micro level differences of your consumer. Because I think sometimes, and this is just a product of our environment, right, is that sometimes we look at things from a macro level and then we miss the mark on a micro level. So I think that is a key component of a lot of the research and audience segmentation that we do on the agency side, just ensuring that we are truly understanding the consumer in all of the different levels and all the different areas, so we can ensure that we're thinking through these things on the front end rather than being reactive on the back end.
That's great. Just to follow up and dig in a little bit on that, does that mean, because we long talked about this concept of one-to-one marketing, and while I don't think we're there yet, I don't think it scales correctly, do you find it you're having to expand into more prolific and profiles of different behaviors, right? So in our pre-call, you both mentioned you're both in California. So, you deal with in the summer fires and different types of things. And here on the East Coast, we deal with hurricane. And so you have customers that are all across. So do you find it challenging to, or tough to expand the types of messages and the types of customers you're trying to deal with to get them to take kind of actions on that?
I mean, I don't necessarily, in my experience, it really depends on the level of trust that you've built with the brands that you're working with and their ability to allow you to recommend those changes based on what you're seeing on the research, right? And I think the leveraging partners' information and insights as well, depending on the tech on that side, is another component of that. In my experience, I haven't found that it's been hard because I've built really strong and trusting relationships with the brands that I work with. So they kind of allow us to make those recommendations. So from my point of view, no, not necessarily.
I think it's very important to trust our agency partners for sure. I mean, that's why we work together. We work together because we trust what you do. But I think that, and then what we're doing on the brand side internally to build relationships is really important. We're a fairly newer brand. We're really focusing on trying to build our brand and create that awareness. And to do that in a really genuine way, we have to really pay attention to what consumers want, what they care about. We have a lot of reasons to believe in our brand, but those don't always resonate with everyone. So it does depend on regionality. It depends on what people do and, where they are in their stages of life. And really just kind of investing in that is something that's actually been one of our big priorities. So we have a community group. Our brand ambassadors go out and they actually get to meet with people firsthand. They're sampling, they're having real conversations with real people to understand what their needs are and where we can fit into their lives rather than trying to have them do what we're asking them to do. We're trying to understand what it is they need and how we can fit within that.
That's great. So on that, I'm curious, because we live in a day where you get instant feedback and instant information, right, on how things are going. So how much do you rely on that? And what's the sort of perfect balance of not overreacting to something and letting it sort of bake and sit and do that, but also, your CEO is going, hey, this is going on. What are we going to do about it? Like, so it's great to get instant information, but sometimes it can be a curse, right? Where maybe you need to let it kind of go for a little more. So what's the balance there that you strike to deal with that?
Newer company, we do have a lot of that. We're really learning, and we're learning internally how to work with each other in a way that's going to benefit everyone around. We do get a lot of feedback constantly. We are all remote, which is working virtual fully with a company that has its own challenges that we've been able to work together and figure out the best way to move forward with that. But we do get that constant feedback, and it is something that we welcome because we learn from it. You don't want positive feedback all the time. If you get positive feedback, you don't learn where you can modify and what you can do to change things. And we've learned a lot over the last several years on where we do need to change things so that it works more toward what we're trying to do. We're trying to make a global impact. And the only way that we can do that is if we trust our partners, we trust consumers, and we trust all of the people that we're working with. And so we do have to welcome the feedback, whether it's positive or negative. And we want to hear what we're not doing right. We want to hear what we're doing well so that we can really kind of go about it in the way that's going to be best for everyone. What do we need to start? What do we want to continue? And what do we need to absolutely stop because it's not working? Yeah.
And to add to that is, the reality of the situation as marketers is we're not going to make everyone happy, right? The people that write bad reviews are not necessarily the same people that write good reviews, right? So it's considering what is the feedback and how should I take this, right? Is this something that's going to blow up and bite us in the end? Or is this something that you take the thought of sometimes any press is good press, right? And you kind of have to use your intuition as experienced marketers to see when it makes sense to let something ride versus when it makes sense to to pull something back. But I think this is also why, as I've grown in my career, I've leaned so much more into testing and learning, whether it be from a data perspective or a creative perspective, because that's the only true way you can understand the difference in your consumers, right? The people that write the good reviews versus the people that write the bad reviews, and what type of messaging really resonates best with those individuals.
I think that's so important. And I remember my days at TripAdvisor, I'd talk to hotel clients and they said, all we're getting is bad reviews. And really, people don't usually live in a time, we don't live in a time now where people are constantly giving us praise, right? We only really hear from them when something goes wrong or they're disappointed or the experience doesn't meet their expectations. So I think that's it's really smart the way you do that. I want to kind of shift to funnel activities, right? So what types of learning do you take from observing those bottom funnel conversions that you look at? And how do you use those to improve your top and mid funnel campaign strategy? Does that make sense? Did I ask? Okay.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, it varies by the brand, it varies by the budgets, it varies by the creative, and sometimes, as a media person, we aren't necessarily given free range to kind of do the things that we need to do. The expectation, right, is either, well, I need to convert or I need to drive awareness. And the approach that I've taken is I've found ways with my selection of channels and my selection of partners to kind of bridge the gap so that, maybe the main objective is to drive awareness of the brand. But by integrating elements of certain media channels and products, I can push people further down the funnel, and I can understand what it is about my messaging and what it is about the creative that I'm portraying my brand attributes as, will get people to that end goal of converting, even though my objective as a marketer or the business was really to more drive awareness. So I think we're kind of trending into this space where, there are a lot of startups, there are a lot of new brands. Of course, the goal is to drive awareness, but from a business perspective, it's to drive sales, it's to drive, return on your ad spend. And so that's where I really think the creative and innovative ways of introducing channels and products together can inform up and down the funnel.
We learned so much from the bottom of the funnel. Being a brand that has several different reasons to believe. We are organic, we're non-GMO, we're also incredibly flavor forward, and we put a lot of effort into what the actual flavors are. But we also are looking to provide something for water drinkers, people who are really looking for something different, but they don't really have any other options. And so we're going about this in a very test and learn perspective, where we're trying to understand, of the things that we do provide, what is going to actually have somebody convert, what is creating that loyalty. It may not be what we think it is. And we're also working, so consumers are our end goal, but we're a B2B company. So our customers are essentially our pouring partners. It's the food service partners that carry our product. So we're learning a lot from them on what drives their consumer behavior. So it's a really big partnership between us to understand that. And we've had to actually modify. Originally, it was just getting people in the door, having them try the product because they had never heard of it before. They had never tried it before. But what we're now learning from that bottom, what's causing people to convert is very different from what we thought it was. And so we're having to change our strategy to focus a little bit more on content marketing and tell people a little bit more about the story that creates who we are and why we're doing what we're doing. It's less about just trying it, and it's more about just really believing in the mission of the brand and why our partners are partnering with us. But we learn a lot of that just from the people who have converted in ways that we never thought that they would have.
That's really interesting. And for both of you, because you gave similar answers, does that mean you do shorter campaigns and sort of, so you throw something out, you get it back, you adjust your future plans, kind of to our earlier point where, real world events sort of can dictate and change things. So based on what you just talked about, does that mean you're doing more work in shorter spurts and then pivoting as you go along?
Absolutely. It's also something that we do a lot with our partners. So these campaigns can change based on what it is. Sometimes it's just introducing an LTO and we just do it for a short period of time and we learn, does the beverage do really well with a pairing with one of the menu items? But sometimes it's not that at all. Sometimes it's our partners are getting involved in a festival. And so we're doing something to drive attention around getting attendance there so that they can have fun and really enjoy the activations of the brand. So we learn from partners on what types of campaigns work collaboratively, and those can run really short times, and then they can change along the way. We've seen some pretty substantial sales increases, especially in incremental sales with our partners just in doing some of these short stints, because we're able to learn from them very quickly, and then we can change if we need to. And then we've ended up seeing so much success that we've been able to repeat a lot of those things. But the short stints of campaigns have actually worked really well with our partners.
I mean, from my perspective, it really depends. I've done it both ways. I've done kind of pulsed approaches where, certain channels run together and then that turns off, we learn, we turn on new ones, those run together, turn those off, we learn, we adapt. So I think it goes back to the nimbleness of what we do and being comfortable with innovating. And just because, previously brands have had lots of success by running long campaigns with big budgets that kind of sprinkle all across the land. But now it's like when marketing budgets are the first things that are cut when the economy slows down, taking that shorter term approach gives brands more trust and more clarity in what it is that you're strategizing against and how it is and can be really effective.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up, the idea of acquisition and then incremental, right? So how do you think about that? How do you implement a successful acquisition campaign and then shift that to then working with those customers on incremental sales? Does your ad channel strategy shift? And if so, how does it shift?
Yeah, I mean, ad channel is definitely a component of that. I think that, so for example, a campaign that I ran recently, we were testing audio for the first time. We really weren't sure how it was going to go. We didn't spend a lot of the budget. We also didn't run it in all of the markets that the campaign was running in. We tested it in 2 specifically that from an audience segmentation point of view popped really well, and it ended up working. It's something that the client was very hesitant in, but the audience information was telling us otherwise. And then we actually then implemented an added value like video component after the audio campaign had wrapped. And the results of the added value video component was exponentially better than the audio because it created this audio and visual component that really drove somebody down the funnel, right? You got this feeling, this emotion from an auditory point of view, and then you applied the visual layer to it, and you're like, as a consumer, wow, that's exactly what I was thinking, and they represented the brand in a way that makes me want to purchase from them.
So how did you talk about attribution then? So you had, the audio portion, then you had a value add. So did you kind of look at it as a collective attribution, or did you credit one over the other?
Well, I would say it was definitely more of a collective attribution, especially in the sense because the video component, there was no ad spend, right? Like we didn't actually add dollars to support that. But from a performance point of view, we weren't necessarily measuring sales. So we saw the percentage lift in purchase intent, and then it was on the client to kind of give us information on whether or not that converted on site. But all we could confirm was, it correctly attributed the success of purchase intent down the funnel, which again wasn't our goal. It was awareness, but kind of shows how you can bridge the gap across the funnel.
That's great. And selfishly at GroundTruth, we're always we're testing audio now. So we're always looking for those channels that will drive those real business results. So it's really great to hear you saying that, there's openness to trying those things out and not necessarily having to say, well, that one specific thing worked. It's more of that collective messaging and the like. So really great to hear. Kelly, I wanted to ask you, how do you think marketers should be thinking about allocating budgets? We talked about the various channels and audio and things like that, but the budgets that have the goal of creating awareness, driving performance, and even retargeting, how do you think marketers should be approaching that in the world we live in today?
That's a really good question. And it's something that we're always talking about at Tractor, because we're going through so many different parts of these life cycles of people getting introduced to us. The way that we've broken down our budget has drastically changed. Initially, it was just getting people to get on board with us. So everything was performance based. Everything that we did was just about converting and getting those sales and making sure that we were getting Tractor out there. Now that we have seeded our brand in a way that people have that awareness, we have to build on that a lot more. So we're shifting away from the performance based. We're still trying to drive people in store. That's something that's always going to be really important to us because we're not a retail brand. We're all in food service. So we do want to still drive that performance, but now we've shifted where we're pushing a lot more brand awareness because we want to explain who we are, why we're here, what we're doing, and build a community and enhance our relationship with the community so that they understand us as not just that drink that's, at one of our partner locations, but they're understanding us as a brand. So I think it's really important for us to now shift to that. I think retargeting is something that we put a little bit of budget into, but I think we want to build that loyalty first before we get fully into the retargeting. We're starting to focus a little bit more on email marketing so that we can start to implement some of the retargeting there. But really, I think it just depends on where you are in your life cycle as a brand and how you would break those down.
I think that's really, I told you both, I've got kids that are older and I watch their behavior and it's interesting. This generation is very conscientious about where they spend their money. They like to learn the story. They like to learn the background. They've never had, consumers have never had more choice. Right. And so, yes, we spend on the things that we like and make us feel good and taste good and all that other stuff, but they also really kind of want to buy into the community aspect of it, right? This is the group that came out of COVID and sometimes were spent their high school years and college years isolated for a couple of years. So I feel like they are really seeking that connection. And so I think that's a really smart way at Tractor that you guys are approaching that. One final question before we hand it over back to Danielle is I wanted to ask you both, if you found out, if you're powers to be said you could only invest in 3 channels. You have to pare down to 3 ad channels in order to drive the most effective return on ad spend. What 3 would you choose and why?
So I think that I would say that we would focus primarily on digital ads that are based on store visits. That's actually what we've been doing a lot of with GroundTruth, and we've learned so much about how we can get people in to just teach them a little bit more about us. So while that is performance-based, it is something that is also creating some brand awareness for us. The second one, I would say social media. We do both paid and organic. This is how we build our community. This is how we build awareness. And something that powers a lot of that is the third one, content marketing. We have really shifted into building a lot of content. I can't tell you yet, but there's something really exciting that's coming later this quarter, and we're going to be launching some new content marketing in January. But this is all just to enhance that relationship. Everything that we do is about building the brand and enhancing the relationship in a way that we're really connecting with the consumers. So just to reiterate, I would say location-based paid ads, digital ads, social media, and content marketing.
So everybody follow Tractor on Instagram to find out what the next news is coming up, right? Kaylee, how about you?
Yeah, I think for me, my sweet spot from channel recommendations would probably be CTV. That's your awareness storytelling channel, right? Rich media, that's your engaging, like give me a reason to care about your brand. And then social is, the community, the conversion is like, what are other people that are like me? What are they doing? What are they buying? So I think being in those 3 different touch points is something that really can drive a lot of value and performance for any brand.
That's great. And just to follow up on that, you both said social. So is that a scary channel sometimes? Is it, I mean, because a lot of times you're leaving a lot to that you can't control, right? Like there's things that happen obviously in social. So is that a risky kind of proposition? And what's your comfort level with that?
I mean, I definitely think that Kelly might have a different opinion than me, being on the agency side and not managing the organic social elements for brands that I work on. I would say that it can be a little bit scary, right? Because social can really be the wild, wild west. And then if you consider what type of social channel, right? Like a Nextdoor versus an Instagram, you're going to get very different people with very different opinions. But I think the component of understanding who your audience is and being empathetic and compassionate towards them is really how social becomes a way less scary place for you to activate in.
Love that.
I think it's also about how you're building the community and how you're responding. Yes, it can be very scary because you don't know what's going to come up, and people are a lot more vocal in their negative. We talked earlier about negative opinions. It's so much easier to share a bad experience that you had, but I think it's how you respond. Like I said before, I like hearing negative feedback because it tells us what we need to focus on and what we need to edit, what we need to change and make sure that we are meeting the needs. Obviously, we're going to have some things where you kind of have to determine, like, is this something that we do need to focus on, or is this somebody, just voicing an opinion that maybe just in the moment they were feeling a little frustrated. But I think it is all in how you understand the consumer and how you respond to the consumer, and engaging with them in a way that they can see. It's nice on social media because you have that natural place to build community in a way that you don't in other forms of marketing. So you can have those real, genuine conversations. I think it's all just how the brand responds.
That's great. Well, I think you're both super interesting with super great jobs, and I could talk to you for another half hour. I almost forgot we were on a webinar, so I'm going to hand it over to Danielle, as I'm hoping we got some questions from the audience, and I want to thank you both. I really enjoyed talking to both of you, and Danielle, take it from here with the audience participation.
Awesome. Indeed, we did get some great questions. Thank you so much for those insights. Great conversation. As you mentioned, we do have time to take a few questions. We'll get to as many as we can over the next 5 to 10 minutes or so. To our audience members, please know that if we don't get to your question today, we always make sure they get forwarded over to our speakers so they have the opportunity to reply offline. Just a couple of quick reminders here from Adweek before we get started with questions. Today's webinar has been recorded and will be available on demand later today, so be sure to keep an eye out for a link to that email with, to the email with the link for the on-demand recording. We'll send that out around 3:30 Eastern. And let's jump into some of these questions here. So our first question, someone's looking to get a little bit more insight into your approach to audience segmentation. So they ask, what does audience segmentation look like? Specifically, do you utilize a generic audience and add other affinities or market interests per segment, or is the approach different? Curious to get thoughts on that.
Yeah. For somebody who works at a very small agency, we don't have a ton of audience tools, and those audience tools obviously are going to give you different segmentation. So I would say my approach is definitely understanding on a general audience level, but then I actually do a lot of research outside of the agency tools that we have. Like I actually spend a lot of time on Reddit, really understanding consumer sentiment. And when it comes to maybe sub niches of an audience that I might be missing. And then I really leverage the partners that I utilize, whether it be most often through first party data, but there's still third party segments that we can utilize. That pull in shopper data and more of the behavioral aspects that we kind of layer on.
I think that the way that we approach it is just kind of understanding with our partners, they vary across so many different parts of food service, and the consumers are all very different, but also our partners are very different. So we're trying to collect a bunch of data from them specifically. We're looking at collecting zero party and first party data so that we can understand a little bit more. What is it that they're looking for? What do they want to learn from us? If they're subscribing to our email list, what are they subscribing for? Do they want education around organic? Are they looking for something that's going to tell them about where we're going to be activating or what LTOs are coming out? So we're learning a lot more about our audiences. And I think this is true with any brand, just knowing who all of those different people are. I feel like we typically tend to look at generations, but when you think about generations, you can be in one generation and think the way a different generation does. And so we're trying to get away from those very specific set audiences that we've all been taught to think about. And we're getting a little bit deeper to understand what people actually need so that we can build segments that are going to actually speak to what the desires and the needs are.
Well put. Thank you for that, especially like the suggestion about using Reddit for a little bit of consumer research. I've not heard that one before, so going to keep that one in the back pocket. So Kaylee, you talked earlier about part of your approach with clients in this era of shortened or smaller budgets is shorter campaigns. So we have a question here about that. Someone asks, how short are your short campaigns? What does that look like timing-wise?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there is a such thing as too short of a campaign, depending on the specific platform that you're activating on. I found thus far that 8 to 10 weeks is a good length when it comes to testing and learning against different approaches for your campaign. And I've seen that be successful across a variety of brands, whether it be CPG or retail. I think the 6 to 8 weeks is a good place to start regardless of the platform.
Thanks for giving us that time frame. So our next question here, I like this one because I think it's about that several folks in the audience might be, and not just the person asking this question. Someone says, what would you recommend to a brand that sort of has a very wide breadth of offerings when it comes to focusing their marketing spending, especially in this new environment? They add in a time when budgets shrink, it's hard to serve all the segments and test all the initiatives you might want to. So looking for recommendations for a brand that might fall into that category.
I mean, this is definitely something that I have to coach my clients a lot when it comes to what we can and we cannot achieve, especially when it comes to a brand that is reaching a wider breadth of an audience, whether it be from an audience perspective or from like a geo-targeting perspective. I tend to present a good, better, best approach when it comes to what we can do. Whether it be from a budget perspective or from an audience perspective, and present it to them in a way that's kind of an evolutionary approach of like, this year, this campaign, this is what we're going to focus on. And that is going to be able to allow us to build a foundation to grow within the next campaign, which is where we'll target and continue to build out some of those segments or opportunities that you feel like are missing from your advertising. So that's usually the way that I like to approach it. And so far, it's been a really good way of helping our brands understand impact when it comes to the decisions they make in their strategy.
I agree with that. I would also add to it, something that's been helpful for us is when working with a smaller budget and having so many different varying audiences, I think it's kind of gravitating towards the audience that's going to engage with you the most, because they're going to help to tell your story. They believe in your product, they believe in your brand, and they can kind of help to tell that story. So when you're getting into these different communities and you're learning a little bit more about the consumers, they already have you in mind. And so you can start there. You have to start somewhere. When you try to attack everything all at once, I find that you typically tend to lose your place. So going for those communities and those audiences that really do actively believe in you, and then building from there, I think is the smartest move from a brand's perspective.
I love that. Yeah.
We do that. We provide insights for clients on that. Those are some of our most favorite conversations. So whoever asked that, call me.
All right, we've got time for like one more question here. I like this one. So we have a question. It's, what channels do the best at telling your brand story? Obviously, performance is so essential right now, but keeping that branding in the forefront. I'm curious to get your thoughts on like what works best from a storytelling perspective, if that were to be a goal for a brand in this climate.
I mean, obviously, I think longer format is the best way to tell a story, but it's also considering how certain touch points and certain channels can work with each other to cohesively or sequentially tell a story based on where it's being delivered. I think that's a big component of how you tell a cohesive story. And I think this is one of the places that I really enjoy playing in, because this is where media comes in with the creative, whether the creative agency is in-house or externally, is having a conversation where it's very collaborative of how something will show up in a media environment and how you anticipate the strategic media approach to coexist with the creative messaging strategy.
I think there's a combination of the digital ads that we're placing. We're doing a lot of media around just getting people into the location where we want to be able to tell them. But a lot of our brand storytelling happens in person. This is why we're focusing so much on building the community side of our marketing team, because we want to be able to have those conversations. We were just at Farm Aid a couple of weeks ago, and I got to hear the most incredible stories from people who were there, and they were talking about their connection with organic farmers, and just hearing them talk about that and really just understanding their stories and their backgrounds and what connects them. I feel like that's something that is incredibly important to understand, and you're not going to understand that just from being on social media, but you're going to be able to amplify it from social media. So it's getting those consumers into the place where you can have those active conversations, and then building on it and telling the story through other channels from there.
I love that. Yeah. And talk about another great example of where to find that really rich consumer research is out in the field and with your customers and doing cool stuff and talking to them about their relationships. That's incredible. I love that example as well. All right. We've got time to sneak in one more question. It's a little one, so I'm going to sneak it in. Can Kaylee elaborate on rich media, please? You mentioned that earlier. I've got a question about it.
Yeah. So when I'm specifically talking about rich media, I'm thinking about products that are outside of your norm, right? Not your standard display banners, but something that exists within a mobile environment. It can exist in desktop as well, but it's more popular in mobile. That is a non-intrusive user experience. And so rich media assets that I've created in the past have included gamifying. So, seeing that gaming is a big component of the audience's behavior, and then leveraging ways where the creative can exist within a game, within an ad. That's kind of how you bridge the gap between your standard assets and then bringing them life in a very engaging way that makes the consumer want to be a part of your brand.
Thanks for elaborating on that.
Can you jump in really quick on that? As putting my consumer hat on, Keely, I think that's so smart. I think we've gotten away from contextualizing our messaging, right? Like, so if I'm engaging with sports content, I'd like the marketer to talk to me like I'm a sports fan. If I'm in a gaming environment, talk to me like I'm a gamer, and I can move across those types of things. So I think that's really smart on your behalf to think of it that way.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for questions today. I'd like to thank our speakers as well as our sponsor, GroundTruth. Some final reminders from Adweek. Make sure you check your email for a link to the on-demand recording, which will be available later today. As always, if you enjoyed today's webinar, be sure to check out our full calendar of upcoming events at adweek.com/webinars, also linked in that event resources area below. Again, huge thank you to our speakers for joining us live today and for letting us pick your brain during this Q&A session. Thank you to our audience for joining us live. And as always, we look forward to seeing everyone on an upcoming Adweek webinar. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.